Morning, David.
Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.
Welcome this morning to Lee Jasper. Welcome this morning to Lee Jasper's Drive Time. Hope you're all enduring the lockdown. I'm totally confused about lockdown. I don't know whether I should be going out, staying in. I can't trust the word the government tells me because I just don't understand the science behind what they're telling me. So I'm totally confused. But we're here today to offer you Lee Jasper Drive Time on a Saturday morning, sending best wishes to you and yours, and condolences to the far too many people, in my view, who have lost loved ones during this COVID crisis. As you know, this is our second home edition because we're in lockdown, being broadcast straight from my home into your Facebook and live streams and so on and so forth on the interweb. I'm delighted to join you. This is Mental Health Awareness Month, if not week, this week. And we're starting that off by kicking off with a conversation amongst Black men about Black men's mental health. We're going to do a focus program with women, a sole women's panel to look at mental health issues for them, so you can
up. Viv, I'm on Black Socks. I'm really excited to be here again for Lee Jasper's Drive Time. And as Lee was saying, this morning's conversation, morning depending on where you are on the planet, because we know that people are watching it from all over the world, we're going to be focusing on Mental Health Week in the UK and having a conversation about that as Black men. I am one of the co-founders of Black Socks. Black Socks is a social action and economic development network. It was formed about 5 years ago. We're not interested in actually delivering services. In fact, we don't deliver any services at all. Our focus is on doing for self within our African and African Caribbean community in the UK and globally. And that involves raising resources, funds, sweat equity in terms of hours that are put into the areas that we believe need that support and that resources most. There are a number of things I will touch on during the program this morning that Black Socks has seeded going forward. One of those is OMA, which is soft launching today. It's an African Caribbean mental health and well-being network. And it's from London, so in the UK primarily, but also through partnership working with Black people globally. So I think I'll leave it there, and I can come back and begin to unpack that as we go forwards.
Gremlins in the system. You know, my shows always attract interference of one sort or another, and today's no different on that score. Thanks for stepping in, Mr. Amoon, to give it that continuity. We were talking about the introduction of Black Men's Mental Health Week. I hope you got most of what I said. We're going to have a special program on women. It's okay for us to talk. We're all brought up as kids, as don't show your emotions, don't talk, and it's not all right for boys to cry. We don't talk enough about these things. And so this program will give us an opportunity to do that. So do feel free to put some questions in the comments. Now, look, this program is about news you can use. So it's not all about what you see on screen. If you've got resources in your local area that you think that people should know about, post them on the Facebook, and we will definitely have those as useful signposts for people out there. To all the blagnificent men out there, you like that? Blagnificent. It's a new Lee Jasper term. It means impressively dripping in black beauty. Elaborate infused with melanin and extravagantly baked in chocolate. Magnificent men. This is an issue, mental health, of course, that's been going on for decades. I'm so tired of the debate in many ways, because since my long years in activism, I've had to fight and get involved in this issue for so many, as are many of my guests. So it's something that has failed to be resolved over the last 20 or 30 so years. What are the key issues? Well, obviously COVID-19 at the minute, because we're suffering in isolation. Everybody's on lockdown, and social interaction is so important in relation to good mental health, that you can imagine that if people are suffering, then the current lockdown will be making that more challenging to cope with. And of course, we've seen, haven't we, the drop in regulations for sectioning of people suspected of mental ill health. So whereas previously police officers or mental health professionals needed 3 professionals to get somebody sectioned, and even when they had those 3 checks, black people were still disproportionately represented. Now there's only one person needs to make that signature. So we've got issues to deal with: racism and discrimination, social and economic inequalities. If you're poor, if you're struck for resources, it's going to affect your mental health. There's stigma. Come on, guys. In our community, we don't like mental health, and we have a difficulty sometimes in knowing what to do about it and how we should approach it. Criminal justice system. Well, we all know the impact of mental health on the criminal justice system. And key issues such as diagnosis, treatment. And I think for black men, the sort of, well, let me speak for myself. I was brought up to be a sort of hyper black masculine male. That's the way I was brought up. And what it's led to is that people never think that I need any help for anything. And I've had serious, stressful periods in my life where I felt unable to get any help, simply because my name's Lee Jasper and I'm bulletproof, and nothing could be further to the truth. That's my family, my mum and my wife, and they would tell you chapter and verse how they've had to pick me up off the floor. And we've had countless reports in the past about, you know, these issues, black men's treatment in the mental health service. I remember a report called Big, Black and Dangerous. I think it was in the early 90s. And it was to do with Orwell Blackwood, who died in Broadmoor at the time. So if you think 1991, what day is it today? 2020. And these issues are still with us. Terrible. And, you know, this is a disease that has no symptoms. You don't get a rash. You don't get a cough. You haven't got aching joints, no fractures, no sprains. Just a head full of darkness and a longing to get some help from somewhere, and inability to explain what's happening to you. Depression, we know, is legion amongst young black men, because the figures tell us so. Suicide, anxiety rates. And another thing we don't talk about enough is childhood trauma. Childhood trauma and abuse. These are legion in our community. And then, of course, there's a traumatic virus of violence that we all see playing out in our communities far too much. And that's not counted for enough, in my view. You don't hear war veterans saying, you know, I feel better after the war. I saw my colleagues being blown to bits, but I'm over it. I'm absolutely fine. You never hear anybody saying that. You don't hear a rape victim saying, oh, I feel better, even though I've just been raped. These things are stressors. And if you're violently raped, or you'll see your best friend murdered on the streets, or you've suffered that childhood abuse or trauma, if your mother never showed you any emotion, if your father, you felt like he abandoned you, if you witness violence in your community, you don't say, yeah, I've been through all of that, but I'm fine. Everybody suffers that trauma. Everybody suffers, and everybody needs that ability to find somebody to talk to. And, you know, stress is a silent killer. You know, I ask you, how heavy is a glass of water? You might say not heavy at all. But if I hold that glass of water in my outstretched hand, the longer I hold on to that water, the heavier it gets. That's the nature of stress. But the good news is 99% of these issues can be treated, can be supported, can be dealt with. And there have been some national reviews of mental health services, which I'm sure our guests will get into. One is the independent review on modernising mental health, their Mental Health Act, published in December 2018. This is what they said. We are in no doubt that structural factors which engender racism, stigma, and stereotyping increase the risk of differential experience in ethnic minority communities when accessing healthcare. And in relation to racism, the Harvard Health Review just published a study that says racism and its effects can lead to chronic stress for children. And chronic stress leads to actual changes in hormones that cause inflammation in the body, a marker of chronic disease. Stress that a mother experiences during pregnancy. I want to say that again. Stress that a mother experiences during pregnancy can affect children even before they are born. And despite improvements in healthcare, racial disparities still exist, and Black infant mortality is twice that of white infant mortality. Then there's the issue of intergenerational trauma. Can trauma be passed on from parent to parent? Well, you may remember Joyce DeGory thinks so on post-traumatic slave syndrome, where she outlines her theory that the 400-500 years of slavery and colonialism, where we were brought up in a culture of deference to white people, has had lasting legacies in our present day psychologies and our cultures and the way that we operate. I couldn't do this program without paying tribute to those who paid the ultimate price in relation to mental health and the failure to get care. I mentioned earlier the Big Black and Dangerous report. That was into the death of Orville Blackwood. That was 1991. You may not remember Rocky Bennett led to a profound inquiry with recommendations in 1998. Roger Sylvester over in Tottenham died as a consequence of failing to receive mental health care at the hands of the police officer in 1999. And we all know, don't we, 2008, the death of Sean Rigg in Lambeth. And his sister, Marcia Rigg, and family have been doing great work in bringing to attention the need for expert care when the police detain our young men. Well, to discuss all of this and more is Malcolm Phillips, and is the counselling programme lead for Hestia, a London-based charity. Spent more than 30 years developing and managing mental health and counselling services for Black communities in the NHS, local authorities and the voluntary sector. He's also the founder of Sapphire, the African and Caribbean Mental Health Network, and he's a board member for the UK chapter of Association of Black Psychologists. Yes, we do have some. We're also joined by Marlo Morris, an entrepreneur, sporting and events promoter, and founder of the Legacy Foundation. You may have been to one of the Legacy galas that were co-organised by Black Socks and Marlo, usually at Christmas, and God willing, they'll be back next Christmas. We're also joined by Courtney Brown. Courtney Brown is CEO of Father to Father, great project over there in Hackney that deals with these issues and talks to other young fathers about the stresses and of parenthood and how that intergenerational conversation can take place so as to give them good guidance. He's a public speaker as well as a businessman. We're also joined by Great Okuson, that illustrious Nigerian creative born and raised in Hackney and making waves across the interweb and in real life. And finally, well, not finally, actually, I forgot we got a cast of thousands. Jay Nelson, business owner, creative director, DJ, and Clubland consultant, servicing the small business sector for over 18 years, and a fabulous creative designer, it has to be said. Finally, the two friends of mine, David Weaver, who's the president of the Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, and Mr. Viv Moon, futurologist, I say that, Black Socks co-founder, and OMA. What's that? Open Minds Alliance. I'm going to tell you much more about that during the course of this program. So there we have our guests. Those are the issues that we're looking to drill down on face. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and all the usual places. Please look, this is an interactive program. Send in your questions. Do sign posters to those resources that are available in our community. And let's begin the show. We started off with Mr. Amoon as he valiantly stepped into the breach as the gremlins bedeviled my my system. And we're going to go back to Mr. Amoon to tell us a little bit more about some of the issues he raised in his preliminary discussions. Welcome, Viv. You're on the
welcome. Thanks, Lee. That was a great introduction to the topic. I thought long and hard about how I wanted to approach it this morning, and I thought to myself, actually, I didn't want to come in as the professional, the expert. I mean, we wanted to come in as a black man who's, as you testified, experienced emotional and psychological challenges over the years. I mean, I have sat on a number of bodies. I have practiced as a psychotherapist in the past, and I have established and run a number of services over the years as well. But I think the climate that we're in now, COVID-19 climate, really, it forces those of us who haven't already done that to take stock of where we are as individuals, where we are within our family, and then where we are within our community, emotionally and physically. And we know that, and whether we're talking to people personally or listening to conversations on the radio or even other people's conversations, we know that people have found it really difficult over the last 7 weeks or so, being in our often in isolation, trying to, become the best person they can be before, they're released back out into the wide world again. A lot of people, social media type stuff like this is a way of not looking at their own stuff, not having to deal with unresolved issues and the like. And then you've had individuals who've used work and social activities to stay away from the dysfunction in the home. Now, all of the key organizations both statutory and not-for-profit, as well as key influencers within the community. There were about 50 people online. And one of the major messages that came across from that meeting was the explosion of domestic abuse within that borough specifically. And we know that's a touchstone for what's taking place across our communities. So in addition to my own personal story is the degree to which we're storing up over the next few years and potentially over a generation when we're talking about our young people. And you touched on the public health element of it, Lee, and how, adverse impact, trauma on the mum, stress on the mother can impact the child even before the child is born and then carry through. And when we see that lack of compassion, lack of attachment, lack of empathy in our communities, invariably it's because the individual concerned experienced extreme stress and trauma in their early years. So we see more now of that taking place that's going to play out down the line when people have moved on from this current crisis or this element of the pandemic. That's one of the reasons why we've come together to set up OMA, the Open Minds Alliance, which is essentially a network based on the Black Socks model. Its primary role is not to deliver services, because there are many good services already out there and many individuals that wish to set up good services that meet the needs of our own community. No, OMA's responsible area of responsibility and primary role will be to advocate on behalf of the community to make sure that resources are equitably distributed. This is something that doesn't happen right now. I was asked in as a comment on the provision in East London regarding mental health. And the commissioner, and I have to praise him for his honesty and his ethical approach on this, opened the meeting of about 26 or so professionals from East London. All the white jackets were there, and the big providers like Mind were there. And he said, before I say anything else, this meeting, I just want to make some fundamental facts, maybe unpalatable facts, but some fundamental facts clear. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be interested to hear what he has to say. He then went on to say, we're embarrassed about the fact that as it stands at the moment, the Turkish community in East London represents its own needs when it comes to mental health provision. It negotiates and argues for its portion of the overall resources at the strategic table. The Jewish community is able to articulate what it requires, have it costed, and give its evidence base in order to draw down its portion of the overall resources. Unfortunately, and I'm embarrassed to say, this is Dan, the Commissioner for East London, speaking here, I'm embarrassed to say the African and Caribbean community is not represented at that table. And I believe there's no point in us talking about frontline services, practitioner services for the Black community until we address that fundamental gap. And everybody in the room was silent when he said that. They all looked around at each other. And then this one woman spoke up and she said, oh, Dan, with respect, I think you're incorrect. So Dan said, oh, really? Well, how am I incorrect? And she responded by saying, well, actually, Mind, which is a white-led mainstream organization, she said, Mind currently represents the Black community. And it is at that point that I corrected her about the organization and why it couldn't be the ethical and correct representative of the Black community. And it's as a consequence of that meeting back in August of last year that the seeds of discussion and action were sown that resulted in the soft launch of Open Minds, the Open Minds Alliance today. More information will come forward. The email address, the Twitter account details, and the website account details will be posted here in the chat room and elsewhere so that you can connect with it. The official newsletter goes live on the 26th of June. And more information will be made available for those who want to be involved in the OMA Alliance. This is something that belongs to the community. It will be driven by the community, and it will represent the community in ensuring the community meets its needs. In the first year, its primary focus will be on the young people in our community, and by young, we mean under 30. There are specific pieces of work that will target young Black men, but clearly the needs of the women are key in our community because they're the ones that produce healthy young people that go out into the wider society. So that's the main thing I think I want to touch on now. And then my personal point is not so much that I suffer from depression. What I think I suffer from is self-doubt. And over the years, I've had to develop a number of tools in order to manage that self-doubt, because when it's at its most acute and its most intense, it can be extremely corrosive, and it makes me somebody then that self-sabotages. And I think a lot of the work that OMA will do will be at that prevention and early intervention end of things, where we are as individuals in our community doubting ourselves, and then as a consequence sowing the seeds of failure. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Viv. And I think that, that's the tone and tenor that we want for the program. Well set by Viv. we can all talk about the theoretical, we can all talk about the statistical, we all know the issues of disproportionality. But I think the reality is that we don't hear enough black men talking about how they managed, how they have responded, how they have experienced. So I'm delighted we could get that degree of candid openness in the program. I'm going to move on now to Malcolm. Malcolm, welcome to Lee Jasper Drive Time. I know you're a hugely experienced professional in this field, and we'd be delighted to hear your opening thoughts.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lee. It's good to be online with you all with such an amazing panel of black men this morning. It's as you said, it's a tough one. I've been around a long time, developing services around black people and mental health for more than 30 years now. And the problems that you outlined from Orville Blackwood and others in the 80s to the 90s still exist today. And it's because we're never really dealing with some of the fundamental problems within the system that create those continuous inequalities that we see in mental health for black people. The starting point for me is training. I mean, when I trained in psychology, psychotherapy, and counseling, there was none of that training that did anything to help me understand the mental well-being of my own people. It was all training based on the idea of the European as the norm. Any understanding of black people was always either as inferior or as having some psychological deficit by factor of our being black. From there, when you roll out into practice, the models of approach, the ways of working with our communities don't fit our values and our ways of engaging with healthcare. And quite rightly, many in our community are suspicious or concerned about engaging with a healthcare system that doesn't really see them, doesn't really understand them as a black person, and doesn't understand their values and way of life. And clearly some of this, there is obviously within the system, systemic and institutional racism that sees black people, sees, if you look like me, sees you as big, bad, and dangerous. So there's, over the years, what I've seen is also a tremendous lack of investment. Viv alluded to it, not just because, I understand what he's saying, but it's not just the responsibility of the black community to get that money, to leverage that money. People within the system, many of the people within the system and outside the system have attempted to speak up for their community and to leverage that money. And what one community may be seen easily as competent and able to manage its own funding and to be given that, other communities are not seeing the same. So it's not like for like, really. It's not as easy for African and Caribbean communities to leverage money as it is perhaps with the Jewish community. And there has been a tremendous disinvestment in looking at models of care that are suitable for black. If you think about any other area of health inequality or healthcare where that impacts on the community, we can come up with solutions, but we come up with solutions where we invest funding. And very little funding is invested at all in addressing the health inequalities that impact on African and Caribbean communities. So consequently, my work has largely, knowing all of that, being in all of that, has been about self-help, has been about developing support for ourselves, developing training for our own therapists to treat each other. Viv was a part of that many, many years ago, to come to train as a psychotherapist with us and to learn African and Caribbean models of psychology and other approaches to treatment other than the European models that were taught in school. The development of our own services is critical. We can't rely on a service that doesn't understand us. We can't look around and see our community, see our brothers and sisters falling ill and not take responsibility to do something about that. So critical in all of the work I've done has been about us developing our own models and our own services and developing self-help. Now, what's happening now, and particularly the work of the Association of Black Psychologists, has been the development and rolling out of models of support for the community. This started in America, but it's been developed in the UK with our people here for our own communities. And we develop what's been called emotional emancipation circles, where communities can come together to address their own well-being, to address the impact of the lie of Black inferiority, and how that impacts on our lives, and how that acts as a stressor, both in terms of the microaggressions and the everyday racism that we see, but also those ideas about ourselves that we've internalized that we need to address. It provides a space for people to learn resilience skills, to learn how to cope with stress in our lives. One of those, you talked, Lee, at the start about stress from epigenetics, from generational trauma that we're still suffering, to the migration trauma that we carry in ourselves, and that we are passing on to our children if we aren't providing spaces where we can do something about this, where we can address this and get help. I think one of the critical things about these things is they're free at the point of receipt for anybody in the community to access. You can access if you contact the Association of Black Psychologists. One of the things in relation to COVID that we've done and have been doing with colleagues around the world on this is developing them online. So there's going to be a rollout of a number of online groups that you can attend where you can get support. There are a range of different groups. The emotional emancipation circles that look at your well-being and resilience and how you address the lie of Black inferiority in your life, but also groups that are particularly addressing developing support and resilience around coping with the impact of quarantine and the COVID virus and the bombardment of negative information that we're getting. Also bereavement groups for children as well, for them to develop a healthy identity and healthy sense of their own well-being. So there's that's I think what I'll say for now, Viv, but and Lee, but that we can do for ourselves. What? I'll continue a little bit while Lee is having some mic problems.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I think I'm on there, Malcolm.
Oh, you're in there.
You know what? I'm glad. All I can say is I'm glad that my introduction was so general, because you and I haven't had a proper conversation in years.
No, true.
And yet I knew that when you spoke, you were going to bring the specificity to all the key points. So, I was sitting there busy putting my finger up, basically,
All right, nice.
because one of the key things, I was speaking about it last week, the two key things for me that are critical. One, this whole idea of do for self, and you just beautifully unpack that. Yeah, that's what Black Socks is all about. We're not interested in owning stuff and, you know, being the ones who are the main propagandists all over social media. We just want to ensure the work is done and the provision is there. And doing for self is one of the most important ways of going about that, because you can guarantee sustainability, because you're determining the resources, when they come, how they come, and for how long they come. So that is the first point. And then also this idea of what a healthy group, a healthy family, a healthy community looks like. You know, all the research shows that those kinds of healthy systems, individual, collective of self. Dr. Naim Akbar, let me raise up our beloved uncle, Dr. Naim Akbar, the community of self, or your family or your immediate community or wider society. It requires, if you're healthy, it means you're communicating with each other and you're partnering around work, you know, or services or initiatives that will benefit all of you. So I definitely want to touch in with you around the OMA stuff. As you were talking, I think that's why Malcolm's on here. That's why I was desperately hunting him all over social media, because there's work to be done. None of us can do it on our own. None of us.
True.
And I think it's one, if we want to get past that one psychological dysfunction that we carry over from, you know, those Ma'afa times, those enslavement times, it's this division. And I think the COVID-19 space is a prime opportunity for those who are of us, and because we're all Black men in here, let me just focus it down that way. Those Black men amongst us who are healthy enough, it's a primary time for us to make that supreme effort to connect and partner, to add value to the works of others and to add value to the works that we're doing. So amazing. I want to hear more. I want to definitely, I'm going to come and park up outside your house under cover of darkness, dodging the police, in order to be able to make sure we connect some of those bits, bits together.
Well, Viva Moon threatening to bring his arms house to your mum's house. That's always a good point to end on. We having gremlins here, so I'm grateful to my esteemed colleagues to step in when the microphone goes incredibly weird. I'm not sure what's happening, but we're working on a technical fix. And Viv's quite right. I was very interested in these emotional emancipation circles and bereavement, because we suffer disproportionate bereavement when we're not even in a COVID crisis due to violence, whether that's domestic violence in relation to Black women, which is high. It's disgracefully high. It's a pandemic of its own right, far exceeding, actually, the number of teenage knife deaths, appalling though they may be. The deaths of Black women nationally exceed that. And I also think that the issue of youth violence itself brings with it its own trauma. So having those resources in relation to bereavement are very important. And I'm delighted to see that the information is being scrolled across the screen. So look, this is news you can use. Don't suffer in silence. You've got an issue and a problem, you know, early intervention, talking to somebody culturally appropriate, and I think that's the thing. Try and find culture appropriate services, and we can help you do that. Is absolutely important. And personal development courses, as Supreme TV Online has just put on the screen, are absolutely one of the tools that you can use. So thanks for that, Supreme. I'm going to move on to the president of the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists, our good friend David Weaver. He's going to give us his thoughts and takes on the issues and challenges of mental health.
Thank you very much, Lee, and it's a real privilege to be here the second week running. So I'm here again, and president of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, also co-founder of Operation Black Vote, and just a Black man really, and that's the capacity I'm wanting to be speaking at in this really important conversation this morning, because we all know that all our communities are under stress because of COVID-19, and when you speak to people in communities, they're talking about the manifestations of that stress and how it's impacting on all our communities. And some of the things that we don't talk about is how it impacts on our Black men. And I suppose it goes back to the point that you were making at the beginning, Lee, around this notion of big, black and dangerous, because that's what we're seeing, not just by the police, but even in the workplace and in our communities. And we already have a level of stress in our communities that is impacting on Black men, which is compounded by unemployment, stop and search, and all of those things. But then when you look at the impact of this COVID-19, this coronavirus, and when people start talking about mental health and the mental health crisis, and it's mental health week next week, people talk about this in very generalized terms. If people speak about men, they don't speak about Black men, even though some high levels of disproportionality in terms of the experiences that Black men face. I'm not going to go through the statistics, but we all know that we're more likely to be, as Black men, restrained or detained. In terms of mental health services, we're 4 more times likely to be detained in mental health institutions. And in terms of suicides and men taking their own lives, once Black men get into that system, they're more likely to take their own lives than white men, often because they're not being listened to and because the therapeutic services aren't there that are culturally appropriate. And if I speak just anecdotally, I mean, I grew up, in my youth, I grew up in Nottingham and in London. And I was just speaking to a friend the other day, and just speaking about, the amount of men that we grew up with who people in the community are just saying, yeah, they're mad, something wrong with them. And people still in our communities have that stigma around mental health. And it's improving, but the stigma is still there. But the manifestations of all the Black men in this room, this virtual room, and people listening can point to a significant amount of Black men that they're growing up with who have mental health issues. So that stigma is there, and there is a real need for the work that Malcolm is speaking about. And I had the privilege of speaking at the Association of Black Psychologists conference, I think it was about 2 years ago, wasn't it, Malcolm? And saw a lot of the work that's been done there, which is really focused on our communities. Now, I represent the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. And I can tell you this, out of the 65,000 members that there are, a pitiful few of them are from Black or so-called minority groups. There's a real need for our people to get into that profession. But what it is telling you also is that at a time like this, where our communities and our Black men need a particular type of intervention, in terms of the established authorities that there are to do that, it's pitiful. They aren't there, and they aren't there providing those services, and they can't provide those services. So it's something that we have to be addressing as communities to make sure that our needs are being met at a time like this. I'm not going to speak for long because you've got other people that you want to be speaking to. But look at older men and older Black men and mental health. So we spoke about the Windrush situation in your show last week, and there've been a number of events like this that are talking about the Windrush. The impact on older Black men and their mental health, even prior to the Windrush scandal, was there. What services are being provided for our older Black men? We spoke about the whole notion of Black masculinity, and I go to the barbers fairly often, although I've not been doing that through the lockdown. But I sit in the barbers very, very often and listen to the conversations that Black men are having in the barbers, where they'll talk about, I'm not a man who this, that, the other. And they're talking about a man who's experiencing stress or depression. And then the barbers often, and we give credit to our barbers and our hairdressers as well, are giving good advice or speaking. There's someone to talk to. But who those men are speaking about when they reference to the other people is themselves. They're talking about their experiences, and there's no support formally to be able to address that. So I think this is a really, really important conversation, because when you look at it in terms of what Black men are experiencing, the employment, the stop and search, not getting the support, the trauma that is taking place amongst them because of the youth violence that is escalating. Come on, let's admit that. and the role that Black men play in relation to that, which is a wider public health agenda. I know that, but a lot of these young boys are suffering from trauma and not getting the advice, the support, the counseling that is required. A lot of them have mental health issues. They're not getting the support that is required. And in fact, they're castigated from our own communities often because people are afraid of them. The big, black and dangerous thing that we're speaking about is often prevalent within our own communities, and even professionals that speak about these issues from our communities are afraid of our young Black men. So we've got to really look at doing for self. We need to look at what do we need to be doing for our communities. And whilst we have these conversations even now, and they're very, very conceptual, they're people that are suffering now. They're people, young Black men that are taking their lives now. So I think part of this conversation is about those groups that can intervene now, or even advice that we can give to people who we know are in contact with people who have mental health issues, Black men who have mental health issues at this time, where we can provide practical advice and input to help them in the here and now. But this is a big conversation. We shouldn't be around just because it's Mental Health Week. We need to be having that right the way through, and conversations like this help that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. I think my mic has gone again. Am I okay on sound?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, look, some important points made there in the round. And, you know, I think it's important that as Black men, we're seen to be able to have these kind of discussions, but also to speak with some insight into our own personal lives. You know, I spoke earlier about suffering stress and depression, but never really been perceived as somebody who would suffer that, and the isolation that can feel like when you're carrying that burden by yourself and unable to have, and I frankly have the benefit of good friends and family around me who I can at least ventilate those feelings and discussions with that help me get through the day. I'd like to big shout out to Tony Seeley over in South London, who's doing really wonderful things with the drama men's group, where he's getting getting Windrush men my age to take part in drama productions that accentuate and amplify and portray these kind of issues. And if you've been to one of these events at Brixton Library, where they normally were held, and other community venues, you see the audience is absolutely packed, absolutely standing room only. Why is that? Because there's a burning need within our community to get off this black masculine, hyper masculine high horse and just be real people. Just tell people and be honest that we ourselves, you know, in fact, suffer the stresses and strains of everyday life, just like everybody else. And that when we, even those of us who perceive to be, you know, superhero strong or whatever it is that your particular social persona is, even we need to access services. And Dave spoke about young men and the effect on young men. I'd like to bring in our guest from Hackney, the great Ockerson, and hear what he has to say from a younger man's perspective about some of the issues that our great contributors are raising. Do keep on asking questions. I saw the question before you come in, great Ockerson, about the first 1,000 days of a child's life, setting the mental health blueprint for that. I cannot stress that enough. The way that women experience pregnancy is fundamentally important to the mental health of the yet unborn child. And we'll come back to that, I'm sure, a little later on. Great. Ockerson.
Yo.
Yeah.
For sure. Especially with mental health, like, I feel like our parents have a lot of effect on us, on how we see things and how we do things, on how we perceive mental health and how our mental health progresses. Like, I know for a big fact that my parents never really talked about about their mental health and never really like showed compassion in any way until I finally moved out of their house, and how they show like a lot of the time when you're a young person, when you're growing up, your parents only focus on the things that they feel like they need to prepare you for. So things like getting good grades in school, making sure you stay out of trouble, making sure that you're ready in every other aspect of life, but they don't get you ready for like what's going on in your head. And then like you realize you're 20, you're like 20, 25, and you don't even know how to tell the person that you're in a relationship with that you love them without like having so much hesitance to it. And when you try to talk about it, a lot of the time it's seen as unmasculine, or it's seen as negative, or it seems like, oh, this dude's weak. This dude's weak. And like, for real, I'm not weak. I know that my homies aren't weak. I know that everybody that talks about their mental health isn't weak, because like we just need to be able to like spread that out openly, because we have a lot to say. We have a lot to talk about, and when we don't get to talk about it, it manifests in negative ways. Like 2 years ago, I got arrested and was put in a police cell. Like I was at the police station. They grabbed my hair. They were writing me up, were getting ready to put me in the cell, put my head down. The police officers grabbed my hair. I swatted it away like any person would. And next thing you know, I'm knocked out with like 5, 7 police officers on top of me. And I never got over that. Like that's something that still constantly gives me nightmares. Like I see police on the street, I can't get over that. And that sort of mental health problem, like that sort of PTSD, that sort of trauma, like it hits you heavy. Like you never really like get away from it. But I've had a lot of support from my friends. I've had a lot of support from people close to me that are like, yo, this is what you need to do. This is, do you want to talk about it? You know, you all right? Like all that stuff. And yeah, it's like that. Like I suffer from depression, anxiety. I'm a high functioning autistic person. Like it's just a myriad of things. And yeah, like you said before, we talk, like you said before, the African and Caribbean community like will be calling people who with mental health problems crazy, and crazy is an ableist term, and it like it takes away that like chance to like talk about things properly, because like as black men, as black people, we go through constant trauma. Like regardless of how white people feel about it, regardless of how white people feel like they go through trauma anyway. But we go through trauma like almost every day. Anything from microaggressions from racism, microaggressions in school. I've been told multiple times that I speak very well for a black man. What does that mean? What does that even mean? It's just a myriad of just negative, just a myriad of negative perceptions. And who laughing in the background? Can't even finish my sentence. Damn.
Viv.
Of course it's Viv. Of course it's Viv. Of course it's Viv. Yeah, yeah. It's like that. And luckily, I'm working with with Omar now. And luckily, since that incident 2 years ago, I've used my experience in career in film to go into documentaries and journalism, and I've sort of, pushed all of my efforts into looking into mental health for Black people, looking into what affects Black people's mental health, looking into why up until like 2011 there was blackface and brownface on TV, and how that affected us mentally as black kids. Looking at how why we all seem like when you're younger you seem to like have a hatred for people that come from the country and haven't seem to like integrated into a new society when they don't need to. They can keep their own they can keep their own culture and all of that, but we seem to have like we call them freshies. We call them like we ridicule them. We do all of that stuff. We come off the people for being we come off the people for being like unique, and that hurts the mental health heavy because like when everything you know about is gangbanging because that's what's popular right now. All this other stuff because that's what's popular right now. You can't really be your own person. Like being a nerd, I was a nerd, being a huge nerd, and trying to talk about that back in primary school and secondary school. I got bullied heavy because of it. I got beaten up because of it. I got jumped because of it, and it hurts heavy. Like I don't think I'm ever going to seriously get over like the trauma that I've been through. I don't think most black people are going to get over the trauma that we've been through heavy, and we need to stop just letting it be like it is what it is. We no longer can just be like it is what it is because I'm not finna let my kids adopted or like whatever have the same trauma that I went through just because we haven't like my generation and the older generation, y'all old men that are on this panel, because I'm a young child and I'm beautiful. Go through the same problems, like that's not something that I'm gonna rock with. Yeah, like I don't know if if I got anything else to say. Um, I mean, like, do you got any questions you want to ask me or like anything?
Well, we will certainly come back. I think it was a powerful intervention there by Great Ockerson. That the sentence that stuck out to me with hurts heavy. Hurts heavy is the nature of the trauma. And you know what? We come as black men to try and break the chain in our own families, in our own experience. I wanted to rise up young Ockerson for giving us that a powerful personal testimony and speaking about his own challenges and his own issues. We have to ask us. I mean, I think back growing up in a West Indian household, I can't remember being told I was loved by my parents. Now, I kind of knew I was on one level. But when he talks about being in a relationship, when Ockerson talks about being in a relationship, not being able to say to somebody else, I love you. Well, if that's not in your common parlance as a child growing up, is it any wonder we have difficulty and a lack of emotional intelligence to have empathy and compassion and to be able to say, I love you to another individual? Well, powerful stuff. And, the traditional West Indian family that many of us grow up in, or traditional African families, where the emotional capital is lean. You remember the traumatic things. How many remember the loving things? Viv and I often have a joke about, when we were kids being told to go get the belt. And it was an instruction when you'd done wrong by your father. And you took each step up those stairs to go and get daddy's belt. And each step filled you with a morbid dread of the violence that was about to be meted out to you. So thank you, Great Ockerson, for bringing us that great insight and enlightenment. And I hope we're going to have more opportunity to discuss with you going forward. And we're certainly going to broaden this out shortly for more discussion. I'd like to now bring in, if I may, our great graphic designer in the pack, Jay. Jay, are you with us? What's your take on what you've heard so far and on the issue of black men's mental health?
Jay's muted. Jay, you're muted.
Yeah, I think you're.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can
All
we
right.
excuse? Can we excuse him? It's men of a certain age and technology.
Thank you, Lee.
Welcome,
Thank
welcome,
you.
welcome, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My own story. I've been a graphic designer for over 20 years. Started up my business with a couple of partners about 18 years ago. My journey, especially being in the club and
I think Jay's on mute.
No, he isn't. It's fine.
Can you hear me? All right. Being in the club scene, it's a very confidence dominated industry. So you had to be confident. You had to be very, very sure of yourself. When I started realizing that I was having issues, I started becoming very withdrawn from the industry, feeling a little bit anxious in certain parties. I'll be at the office and I'll be working. I'll be telling people that I'm working overtime, but basically I'm kind of almost trapping myself in my own office. And it kind of grew from there. The hardest thing to do was to actually tell people what you're going through. And I think once I started doing that, it became a lot easier to kind of move forward. Like you said, Lee, and a couple of the guests, the stigma is definitely, you're a man, you're supposed to man up, you're supposed to be this kind of person that doesn't really feel that sort of pain or, show your emotions and so forth. But I think a lot of us do have issues and do have stuff that we store up and we're not able to talk to our friends or our companions or even our family about. I felt that for me, if I started telling people about this, it would affect myself and how people looked at me. It'd affect my business and how people kind of reacted to me being in business. But like I said, talking was the biggest thing for me. I remember talking to my brother and a couple of my friends. We sat down and I had to kind of tell them this is what's going on with me. And at that moment, as I started speaking, it just felt like there was a complete weight off my shoulders. It just felt like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is how I need to move forward. And I think there's definitely a lot of issues with Black men in doing that. I've heard Viv talking about having these barbershop situations where guys will be able to talk in the comfort of their own environments, which I think is a great idea. I try to talk it about as much as possible now within my circles, and more so even I try to encourage people that I feel that are going through the same things that might not identify with those, but try to talk to them in the same way to say, it's actually all right to talk. It's actually all right to actually say that, what, you're struggling or you're going through things, because that is, I think it's the build up. I mean, me being a creative, I overthink things. Like, before I go to do something, I've thought of 100 and 200 scenarios before I actually go to do that. And that kind of brings you into this place of always second guessing what you're doing, not being forthright with what you're doing. And in my profession, that's something that I relied on very heavily. So, when that started affecting me like that, I started becoming paranoid of how people viewed me, how my friends viewed me, how clients viewed me. So that stopped me from talking for so long. But like I said, once I started actually speaking, it was a tremendous weight off my shoulders. Thankfully for people like Courtney and Viv, who, we've had regular discussions on trying to kind of, this outreach situation, trying to get more Black men involved in speaking their mind and so forth. I think it's great. I think this is what is definitely needed for our community. I think there's probably even a lot of Black men out there that don't even realize that they're going through these things, that actually, once we start speaking, me and my brother started up a consulting company just before this lockdown thing initiated. And within that consultancy company, we had a DJ agency. I was trying to recruit certain DJs and so forth. So I was just calling different people who I knew and said, you know what, got this agency starting, would you like to join? Spoke to a particular person who quite outrightly just said, no, I'm not interested. Not on that. I've got so much things going on right now. And we just started speaking and conversating just in general. And I said, look, music saved me so many times. So, you know what, I use music as something that kind of, you know, mellows me out and kind of enables me to kind of move forward sometimes when I'm feeling stressed. So I actually started going into what I had been going through. And literally, we ended up on the phone for about 2 hours because he then started breaking down what he'd been going through, the issues, the home life, the work life, the studying life. And by the end of it, he's like, I'd love to join that agency. Like, please just sign me up. And that just showed me that there is a definite stigma, there's a definite blockage that Black males feel in terms of actually sharing their story without you sharing your story first, or just feeling like you're in a safe environment to share your story. And I think that's definitely needed. That's how we move forward. Guys.
Thank you for that, Jay. And again, you know, one of the most common themes that are coming through all the conversations, and whenever this conversation is raised, is the fact that talking to other people is incredibly helpful if you're going through this stress, and finding wise counsel, finding good people who you can trust, who can keep your confidence and offer you great advice is absolutely critical. I'm going to move on, if I may, because time is running away, and always with quality conversations, you end up in a time warp, and you look at the clock, and an hour and a half has disappeared in quality conversation, and it's all down to you guys' contribution. So I'm going to move on and speak to Marlo Morris. Marlo Morris is a entrepreneur. He's a sports and businessman promoter. I've known him for years, introduced him through Viv Amoon. He's the founder of the Legacy Foundation. I'm sure most of you have been to one of Marlo's events at Legacy, or indeed his entertainment or sportsing events. His big brother Joe sadly passed. He's got a great initiative around providing boxing and training facilities for people. And I'm delighted he's been able to join us on Lee Jasper's Drive Time. Marlo, how are you doing, sir? Yes. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Lee. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Right. I've had some slight technical issues earlier, so I was surprised to even get on the line. So I thank God that I'm able to get on. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Or at least I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
All right. Then. So
no, he's not been.
Yeah.
No, I think those technical difficulties are still with us. While we sort them out, I shall move on, if I may, while we sort out Marlo's technical difficulties and get him in a place where he can come back in with us. And I'll move on, if I may, to Courtney Brown. Courtney, I don't know what to say about Courtney. He's a living legend in his own lunchtime. He's somebody everybody knows. And I'm again, as with Marlo, and I hope we do get him back, because I know he's got a fantastic contribution to make. But again, with Courtney, somebody who's faced personal challenges and has had to walk and sometimes crawl to the mountain top to see the bigger vision of life. So Courtney, delighted you could join us today. What are your thoughts and contributions?
Thanks, Lee, for inviting me to this platform. Again, like everybody previously has said, great platform, and we do need to discuss this. I'm going to go through what I call the 4Ds: discussion, disclosure, discover, and drive change. So obviously we already now we're having this discussion, which we do need to have this discussion, because it helps break down the stigma of mental health in our community. It helps raise the awareness of it, and also within the discussions we start finding out about services that are supporting our community, our African Caribbean community. The disclosures are very important because they're lived experiences. And you know, my personal lived experience is that you know, I started father to father because of, you know, the journey with my dad. You know, I'm that child, one of those children that they called suffer from adverse childhood experiences. So as a child, I witnessed domestic abuse. There was mental health there, drugs and alcohol. Obviously, I went through that journey not knowing how all of those things had impacted me until I started into my later years as an adult and certain behaviors started playing out. Jay touched on the whole promotion, club life things. That's where I was. And for me, that was, you know, there was this alter ego that was playing out, but it was, I was self sabotaging myself because of lack of confidence in myself, my self esteem. So I was drinking a lot, sleeping around, you know, just doing things. But it was my trauma. Now I understand it was my trauma playing out. And that stemmed from my dad. Now, if I speak to you about my dad a little bit, came over to England from Jamaica, was traumatized in Jamaica himself when I heard about the beatings that he used to receive in Jamaica. They came to England where he then had to fight again to survive or to be even seen. And when I mean fight again, he had to fight against the police, he had to fight against the mods. You know, it was a system that was a racist system. But obviously, as a child, I didn't understand that. But as a man now, I'm able to like um, see beyond that and understand, not condoning the behavior, but understand his behavior and what he had to deal with his trauma. Um, so moving on to the last 3 weeks now. So actually, so I had to then learn to forgive my dad and say to myself, well, how can I hold a man accountable for something he didn't know? You know, I learned something around post-traumatic stress syndrome, racial identity, and trauma. These are all theories that are out there that anybody can go and look at. So, like I said, I had to get to that point of, wait, how can I hold a man accountable for something that he didn't know and find forgiveness in him and ask forgiveness in myself? But moving on into this COVID times now, 3 weeks ago, I got a call from the community to say that my dad, because my dad's very well known in the community, that people see my dad, and you know he wasn't looking himself because my dad normally wears suits and so forth. So what I was hearing is that my dad was, you know, not dressing well, so he looked a bit shabby, and you know, and I heard about some aggression in the community. Um, I went and what I found out, because my mum phoned my auntie, and what I found out, my dad wasn't taking his medication. So I went and got my dad, took him to a hospital in North London, and and my dad was digi, really edged, which I understand because of his experience in the system, the mental health system from before, the lack of empathy, you know, that terminology, big and black and dangerous. This is how the society saw my dad back in there, and not and wasn't in rather than talking therapy, just injected him. So anyway, so I've taken my dad to the hospital. He's very, I could see his anxiety's up, but I'm trying to keep him calm. And you know, I walked into the hospital, and do you know what? No form of empathy. You know, when the staff members were speaking to my dad, it was just very cold. And you know, my dad's 70. Yeah, he's traumatized. Yeah, he hasn't been taking his medication. And that made me angry. I'm telling you, I'm angry because you have no empathy towards my dad. You're just treating him like, you know, he's a vulnerable person. So obviously I stepped in as the son, and you know, started putting it on them. And once you understand the system, you know the type of language to put on them. Yeah, where they realize that actually they're not dealing with no stupid man here. Yeah. So they finally took notice of my dad. But let me tell you when my dad really started to settle. And I said, God bless this woman, this nurse, senior nurse. She looked at me and she said, Mr. Brown, I know your dad. I thought to myself, all right, cool. You know, who don't know my dad? It's North London, a lot of people know my dad. She goes, I know your dad. She goes, where's your dad from? I said, Jamaica. She goes, where? I said, Town. Do you know? She said, that's where I know your dad from. When I took that nurse into where my dad was, because he was in this, room, white walls, and everything kind of pinned down, and she started speaking to my dad. I see my dad's the more his whole body language changed. You know why? She was able to empathize with him. She understood the journey of our black men, and especially from that area. So I would say 70s, late 60s, 70s. She understood what they had gone through, and she was able to connect with him by talking about, people they knew in Jamaica and everything. Empathy is a big thing, and so that brings me. So I just want to disclose that to you, because that brings me to the next one of my 4 feet, drive change. I'm part of the OMA, Open Minds Alliance, and we need to do for ourselves, have our own organizations that can show empathy, that can be compassionate, that can listen and understand our journey of the African Caribbean journey of a black man, So that's where I am. So it's like I said, for me, it's about the discussion. We need to have the discussions in our community to raise the awareness. We need the lived experiences, which is disclosure. We need to discover the organizations, and not just discover the organizations, but also to support those, capacity build those organizations to be able to support the African community and work collaboratively together. But most of all, which Viv and other people mentioned, drive change. It means that we have to be at the table where those decisions are being made for our community. We need to be sitting there with a voice. We are the ones that can. We have the talents, we have the gifts in our community to do it ourselves. So that's where it's for me at the moment, Lee. As in terms of father to father, that's what father to father does. We've got products. My day job is that I'm a head of student engagement for a school in Hackney. I sit on the head teacher steering group, and I see our boys are traumatized in school. I see them. They feel the division. They feel that they literally say to me, Mr. Brown, yeah, Mr. Brown, like, why, they're against us. I have to sit down there and listen. And you know what? That's the key thing, listening. Acknowledging their pain, their hurt, their frustrations, but showing them how they can navigate this system. They're going to come against these obstacles. But the key thing is we have to show them they can overcome it as well. Yeah. So this is what we do in Father. As I said, as I said to Viv and many other people, that my view it's not about me now. I've got 4 sons and 3 grandchildren. It's about my legacy, their legacy, our legacy. What are we leaving for them? Otherwise, if we don't do something now, then this is just going to continue still. So that's what I have to offer to this discussion. Hope I didn't take up too much time.
Thank you. You have as much time as you want when you're speaking truth to power and bringing that kind of insight, Courtney. So thank you very much indeed. Do for self is a much proclaimed philosophy. However, in this country, we've been groomed to be much more dependent than we need to be. And one of the things that Black Socks and indeed, I think OMA, the Open Minds Alliance, will be focusing on is what can we do for ourselves? How can we help ourselves? And the village that raised the child, the community that has the empathy to provide that wraparound, all of these things are very important. And you talked about your father. It's funny, your organization is called Father to Father. Maybe you need to open a subdivision called Son to Father. Those sons go back and rescue their fathers. Because I was very struck by your personal testimony about accessing mental health support for your dad. I remember when I was a mayoral advisor, one of the first things I did is I went to visit acute mental health hospitals in London, because as an activist, I'd heard about the stories, but I'd never been in and seen the inside of an institution myself. And I took the time to visit. And I can never always remember the very first one I went into, or the very first two. One was Maudsley. And I went there because of the sheer terror in the community when anybody said they were taken to Maudsley Hospital. It meant its reputation in those days was appalling. And when these big double doors with the locks on were opened simultaneously like that, and what I saw was row after row after row after bed with young black people, every single one from beginning to end. The first thing that struck me is it looked like the galley of a slave ship. There were so many black people in that hospital. And the other one I went to visit to was St. Mary's over on your side, Courtney. And a young Rasta, well, not young, black Rasta was running the facility at the time. And I opened the door and it was the same vision. And what struck me in both of them is the utter lack of empathy in the way that you've described. So do for self, cultural competence, empathy, all very important. Now, Marlo, I'm hoping that we've managed to conquer the technical difficulties. I'm looking for advice from the studio. Do we have Marlo on the line? Is he with us? I'm not seeing anything. And can I just say as well, just while we're waiting, the comments in the comment section. Can I just got to stand back and applaud, because I could have these guys on as guests. Such is the quality of conversation that I can see on the text thing. And
Lee, sorry to interrupt, Lee. Can I just say one thing? I just seen a comment by one of your, and I think that's the point that's a key point. What I've seen in the community, and I'm not knocking it, I'm just talking it how it is. We cannot be saying we're mentoring young men if we haven't done the work on ourselves. And that's the key thing what Father to Father looks at. There's no way I'm going to put men out there as mentors if you're not willing to do the work on yourself, because we've got traumatized men out there. And as I said to a lot of people, our boys are already traumatized out there, let alone we go out there and start projecting our own trauma there. So the men that I've got within Father, they had to go on a 30-hour training thing that looked at racial identity and trauma. We touched on a little bit of Dr. Joy's degree, but also we created platforms for those men to come and talk freely before I even allocated them a young black boy to mentor. And I think that's key. And because I've just picked up in the group, I think that is key, that the work has to be done on ourselves first before we start going out there and saying we're doing the work. So I just wanted to add that. Sorry.
The energy from the comments is jumping into the conversation. The energy is so powerful, I can almost see the people speaking. I'm going to broaden it out for discussion amongst you guys who are the experts. So I'm assuming we've not been able to get Marlo on, which is deeply disappointing. But I'm going to save him for another day and bring him back, because he's definitely got a story to tell. I've got people, if you could just indicate and let me know if you want to speak, and then I'll come to you. I've got Mr. Amoon indicating, so let's go. Yes, Mr. Amoon, are you coming in?
I was waiting to be unmuted. I didn't want to take control from MediaNet. Consistencies, and that's what's really reassuring for me from a strategic policy and capacity building perspective. There are the repeated points about building capacity within our community, the training stuff. Malcolm touched on that in some detail. Courtney again has just picked up on that, and others in the stream that we're watching now in the chat room are talking about the need for us to train our own individuals up. And that's really, really reassuring for me, because it's one of the big pieces that OMA is going to be focusing on. Malcolm talked about the groundwork that's been done before through other networks and initiatives that he's led on. He and I have done work with, and we've done stuff internationally with Dr. Naim Akbar, Black Psychology Network in the States, and also some amazing work taking place in Africa and in the Caribbean. I really, focus on the lessons that we've learned from the past rather than seeing them as failures, because often people will say, we've tried it before and it hasn't worked, rather than looking at it as learning that we then improve on. And that's what OMA is particularly focused on. It's my latest iteration in terms of me allowing myself to be brought into it. So we'll definitely connect up with Malcolm after this. Well, I'm definitely taking notes of the messages within the group so that we can link all of those together and make sure that whatever we're doing going forwards, and I'm talking from an OMA perspective here, whatever we're doing going forwards is adding to what is already out there, is advancing and enhancing what is already out there rather than replicating. And where we see gaps, then we'll work in partnership with those that are already there to make sure that those gaps are filled. I think that's a really important point. I think it's also important that, as Malcolm rightly said, we draw on the resources that are there. We're taxpayers. We get those resources to work for us. We're already in conversation with Mind Central, and then the local minds, because Mind is in conversation with Malcolm to make sure that what we're talking with them about in COVID-19 regarding provision is absolutely correct. And what we talk with them and the BACP, British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and others about in the mid and long term is right for our communities going forwards. I think it's also important to say that there's the women's conversation coming up next Saturday. So I'm in no doubt that there are many sisters. I've seen Karen Allen coming up in the chat room. They're taking notes and preparing for the key powerful points that they're going to be making next week Saturday. We also have international events coming up on the 24th of May. We've got a number of key people. Professor PLO Lumumba from East Africa, Kenya specifically, powerful speaker. We'll talk across the piece about what's happening for us as a community. We've got Al Sharpton from New York, let's be specific, where they've seen so many deaths as a consequence of COVID-19. We've got Lord Simon Willey and many more. David McQueen is a very, very, very powerful speaker and advocate within the corporate sector. And I want to touch on David McQueen specifically because many won't know that my real focus and passion is money, financial services, and technology in terms of how we more effectively deliver what we need to deliver for our communities going forwards. If we're taking the learning from the efforts that we've made in the past. So those are the main points that have come out for me. Our own authenticity and being honest about our own stories and sharing them more often, even if we're wearing a professional hat. And Courtney did that beautifully. Great did that beautifully. And I love that young man, 20 years of age. And he's one of the key drivers for the OMA network. We've got to give over the reins of control and leadership to our young and stop talking about doing it. And right now, it's individuals like Great that are driving us elders within OMA. So, I mean, they're the main points that are coming out for me. And I'm making notes of the people in the chat room that I'll follow up on. Christine Wellington is also driving with Courtney and myself on the OMA initial development. And I'm definitely going to pick up with Malcolm, because Malcolm is one of those individuals who sits at the very center of our community expertise in this particular area. And one other individual whose name I want to call before I step off, Lee, is Dr. Sandra Richards. We're speaking to over the last weekend, who will definitely be on the chat next week, Saturday. Thank you.
Well, you're hearing it here, people. If you think this conversation has been great this week, we're going to follow it up with a women's conversation next week to give us both sides of our dimensional experience. Viv mentioned Gray Tockelson, and he's back to give us more input. So great. You was indicating you wanted to make a contribution. Come in, son.
Big facts. Yeah, I would love to make a contribution. So we're talking about like bringing it over to young people and to the youth, and the youth have been doing that for a little while now. And we do need support with it because we consistent, like sometimes you're just chilling with your boys and next thing you know you're in a deep conversation about the trauma that you guys have been through, or 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 the problems that you seeing going down. It's good to know that our elders are out there. They're looking back and thinking we need to make sure that this doesn't happen, that the trauma isn't so strong, that the trauma isn't as potent as it is now. Because as a young person, I'm sure most Black people in London, America, have been in the situation where you're walking down the street and you see another Black person coming up, and you have to check them. You have to make sure that, like, yo, I hope this person's cool. If this person's not cool, then I don't know what's going to go down. Like, you give them the head nod, you give them the you look at them, you give them the head nod, you should give straight eye contact. And I don't know, that's not something that I've ever seen white people have to do. Like, they don't walk down the street. She constantly worried that, oh, someone's gonna like jump me, someone's gonna take my life, someone's gonna check me, someone's gonna ask me what it do, like what's up. It's not something that I've ever seen white people have to deal with. And hopefully by the time, like, 2 generations down from now, like, my grandkids will have to walk down the street and think and have to check somebody, make sure, like, give them the head nod to make sure that they straight, to make sure that they ain't on no wild one. It's like that's indicative of like a big problem because, like Courtney said, with mental health, like, we've always, especially Black men and Black young men, we've always been seen as like aggressive and intensely like terrifying. I get, like, when I was 15, I was considered like 20. When, like, I was considered a full-grown man, and I wasn't. Like, sorry, I just saw a comment. Drug abuse, smoking, skunk, drinking have contributed to mental health. I mean, yeah, it has, but not in the way that people think it is. Like, smoking weed and drinking has our ways of coping with PTSD. Like, when most rappers talk about their effects of drinking or smoking, or even drug abuse, they're saying that that's their way of coping with the trauma that they have to deal with. Like, when I first got out of jail, I ate a lot, and I kept on eating for years up until this COVID thing started. And the eating was my way of coping with the trauma that, like, I had in my life. Like, people, that all of that is a way of coping. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, it feels like nobody really understands how difficult it is to be a young Black man, because you get taken into if you get taken into a mental health institution, you come out, like, you gotta say you are conscious or something. You can't tell them that you are dealing with your mental health. People will start looking at you crazy, regardless of whether they have a positive view of mental health. There's already a stigma there that if you've gone to a mental health institution, that person's local. We can't trust that person. We can't hang them with that person. That person's unstable. If you, like, and when I went to a therapist, and I was going there for like something completely different. And she told me, she was asking me a ton of questions, and she was like, "No smoking weed when you get into this into this therapy group." And I didn't know how to respond because I don't smoke weed. I don't smoke at all. I'm not a smoker. At that point, I never even smoked weed in my life, and this person was telling me not to smoke weed, and I was like, "Who are you to make that assumption about me?" That's an assumption that most Black young people have to deal with. So yeah, like difficult, and we're trying to work with it, especially young people, because now we've seen the generation above us not deal with the mental health, and we're trying to change that, and we're trying to deal with our mental health and the mental health of our friends. Like, I constantly give my friends affirmations. I constantly tell my friends that I love them. I constantly make sure that I'm down for them, and that they're always going to be part of my life. And that's not something that we just get normally. Like, whenever Black people and Black men, and especially young Black men, are idolized in the media, it's usually a fetishization, and that's never helpful. And that doesn't give us the sense that we're going to that we're useful in the world, other than to like be breeding. And yeah, it's whack. It's insanely whack. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you again. Man, these comments are cooking on this stream today. Thank you all for your comments. They've been really appreciated and helping the conversation flow. Malcolm, I know you wanted to come in, but we do have Marlo, and time's running against us. So if you wouldn't mind being a little bit more patient, if I could take Marlo, given we dropped him last time, and I'll come directly to you afterwards. If anyone in the panel wants to indicate in the chat box, I'll come to you directly. There's 20 minutes left. We're due to finish at 12. We may just go over a tad with your patience, gentlemen, and that's because there's just such great demand online for this conversation to continue. So we may just extend it by a few minutes. But getting over to Marlo, I introduced him before as an entrepreneur, or as a sporting and event promoter. I'm sure people have been to one of Marlo's events in your life. You must have been, and if you've been once, you've probably been back a few times, such as their quality. He's also the founder of the Legacy Foundation, and many of you would have come to the Legacy Gala Awards every end of year, December usually, where we give back to the community and recognize the great and the good. Marlo, glad you could get back, sort out the technical difficulties, and get back online. Yeah, let's hear from you, brother. You got a big audience waiting to hear from you.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you, Lee. Thank God it's been a trial, really. It's been testing my mental health, trying to get on this line. I don't know why we didn't just do. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, by God's grace, we're here. Thank you for the introduction, Lee, and I'm honored to be on a panel with such esteemed specialists in our community. My humble contribution. You've dubbed me as a businessman, but to me, I don't see myself as a businessman per se. I wear many hats. I'm multifaceted. I will start with one of the hats I wear, which is the Legacy Foundation Global. Our aim is to assist our community by enhancing their lives through mediums such as education, personal development programs, and well-being programs, by supporting them and the local businesses and enterprises. In so doing, we encourage a general consistency amongst the wider community, and create a collective understanding that through collaboration we can achieve anything that we desire. Yeah, we create a safe space where communities can discover and develop some of their gifts, their talents by engaging with them and empowering them to channel their energy in the most appropriate way. We recognize and reward raw talent by building platforms for them to be celebrated locally, nationally, and internationally through connection, publications, and partnerships with professional organizations and individuals such as lawyers, judges, barristers, media, sports personalities, and teachers. Yeah. In celebrating individuals on open platforms, we give them a sense of purpose, which is greater than themselves. Legacy is paramount for us as a community, as we help lasting legacies that can pass on through generations. Right, so out of that came the Legacy Gala 5 years ago. We teamed up with the Society of Black Lawyers, Operation Black Vote, and Black Socks, and its purpose was to honor the best in our community in criminal justice, education, media, technology, business, sports, faith, and it's about leaving that legacy for the next generation. But I found through that process, I'm creating platforms for others, but I'm not looking at myself. And I had to look this whole COVID season as I need to look within myself and look at where I've come from, where I am now, or where I'm going. Yeah, I started looking at where I'm come from.
Again, challenges. Oh my days. This is testing my patience and resources. I'm not sure why we're having that. Just like to big up MediaNet Live, the only solidly black platform out there that's bringing quality content time and time. I know many of you will know Theo Ambrose back there at the studio operating a camera. Theo, you're not on screen, but we're sending you our love and appreciation. And make sure you press like for MediaNet and ensure you follow them on Facebook and elsewhere. The details are coming across the screen. If I may go to Malcolm, who was indicated, then I'll come to Dave and Jay and others. We got, I think. Oh well, hold on. I think we got Marlo back. Let's see if we can continue. Marlo, you were just about to tell us about your personal reflections on the challenge faced as COVID season blankets the nation. Do continue.
Yeah. Sorry about that interruption. As I said, this technology is trying, but we're working through it. As I said, when I started to interview my dad, I realized that there's a lot of things that happened in my childhood that me in business, in relationships, and just in understanding myself. And one of the things that happened was that we were in Jamaica. We grew up in Jamaica, and we were in the middle of a political warfare, yeah, between the two governing parties, and our house got robbed. And when our house got robbed, it was only about 7, 8. It was robbed by gunmen, and they had all our family on the floor, and they took it, and that affected me and caused me to be angry. And that anger followed the whole of my life, and it was the beginning of mental ill health for me. You understand? Anger and that feeling of vulnerability to protect our family. And I was over in England working to provide for us in Jamaica so we could have good schooling. But as a child, you don't understand this until you get older. Yeah, as a child, abandoned and left to this situation. You understand? So as a result of that, I became very angry, made a lot of mistakes coming back to England, made bad as a young person, and ended up in prison. And in prison, where a lot of us
Oh my days, this is testing the patience of Job, honest to goodness. My man's giving quality contribution and we can't get the technical difficulties. You know what? I'm going to have to interview Marlo by himself and get that story as an addition to this one, because it's just proven to be impossible to try and get him back on. But if I may go over to Malcolm. Malcolm, if we can comment on what you've heard so far and some of the comments below.
Yeah, well, there were two things I wanted to come back on, and really important learning from the young brother, great Okosun. I was interested to hear about the head nod. The head nod between Black men has always, for me, been a very positive thing. It's part of our African heritage in recognizing each other when we pass. It changes down generations, and it may have become, as he described, as something that could be quite challenging and negative. A desire to there'd be a time when it's no longer needed. I'd actually like there to be a time when it goes back to what it was, which was a greeting in South Africa. They would say "Sawubona" with a head nod. It means I see you. I see you, and I see where you've come from. I see what you go through. It's a spiritual connection between one person to another person to recognize you and your people and where you are in life. And so I think that thing is something that we need to continue and to develop as a positive thing, and not allow our values and our rituals to be taken down a negative path. The other thing I thought was really important, Courtney talked about the importance of feeling understood and empathized with, but also that thing he talked about in hospital when with his the very moving story with his father and the importance of connecting with somebody. I'm reminded of whilst going into hospitals as you did, Lee, and you'd see the slave ship scenario of all these young Black people. We also saw was a lot of the staff were also Black. And we have to remember a point Courtney raised, that though many of us who are working in the systems are ourselves African and Caribbean people, but we have all been impacted by the lie of our own inferiority and white superiority. And so the work, it was pleasing to hear the need that all mentors have to go through a program before they should work with young people. But I think this is something that we all need to go through, because we all have influence on young people. And I think it's a program, particularly, this is what the EEC, the Emotional Emancipation Circle, is about. It's a program so that we can all rid ourselves of the impact that 400 years of slavery and indoctrination has done to us. We need to, in developing our services, ensure that it's not just about getting the qualifications, the professional qualifications. It's also about being of right mind and being able to live our true selves and our values in delivering to our communities.
Thank you very much. Just in relation to the head nod, I mean, I remember as a young Black boy, I grew up in Manchester and Moss Side. I remember that if you strayed out of your immediate area and you saw a Black person in a white area, you were physically relieved to see that.
Yeah.
That wasn't a stressor. That was, hi, brother. And normally come up to you and say, listen, you're new in town? Yeah, well, just make sure, avoid that pub, or don't go around those corners, or, you know, watch out for them boys over there. But it was an act of community care, and we're relieved to see the Black people. And now we're in a situation where poverty and violence has brought us to the position where even us as some of Black men are frightened. I'm not particularly, but I know some are, of our own young people. And what I loved in what you said is about the South African greeting of Sabona, because I see you is a philosophical strand of Ubuntu. Because I am because you are.
Yes.
And that is and I just wanted to say this, that people will often ask me as a political activist, how do you do what you do? How do you sustain yourself? And I will tell you that knowledge of my cultural history is my personal superpower. It's the thing that provides me with the cultural anchor at times of great stress. And the point about self-therapy that Courtney made is well made. It's a principle of Black Socks. It will be a principle of OMA, because far too often I see people in the public space who are themselves suffering trauma, and much in the way that Great Okusun said, that young people, and even I've done it. I grew up smoking weed and drinking brandy, and I did it to cope with the stress of everyday life. Police harassment, sus. I was self-medicating. And some people seek to self-medicate by putting themselves in the public space when they're not yet looking to the gas and the oxygen of publicity to soothe their lack of belief in themselves, and thinking public acclaim can help them, and often spreading more trauma than problems that they're actually solving. Okay, well, we'll move on, because I think that what we need to do is now bring the boat into the harbor, as I like to say, in the last few minutes, and begin to talk about, the strategic takeaways, solutions, and give people that mental health first aid box that they can think about today. If people have got comments and signposts to organizations, I've already on Thrive organization in South London, please look at their website. I've already talked about Tony Seeley over in South. You've heard about Father to Father. There are many more, and you can post them in the comment section, and people can pick that up as we go along. People are already saying we're going to have to do part 2 with a younger panel. David Weaver.
Yeah, hi. A really powerful show today. I mean, I suppose one thing I want to get across is that it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because this virus is impacting hard on our communities. All the news is saying it's disproportionately hitting our communities, and it's going to hit our Black men, and hit our Black men hard. So I think there's something about providing the support, all of us, each of us, just providing the support. And what the young brother on this show said was the importance of just speaking and talking to each other. So we can talk about the big things that need to be done, but in the months ahead and over the next year or 2 years, we're really going to see the manifestation of that in our streets. So the practical thing around just providing support, and we see our young brothers and sisters, our older people in the communities, and they're suffering, and we'll be suffering too. It's the importance of speaking to each other. But I think the other thing was the point made around getting support from organizations. So Malcolm's organization, Association of Black Psychologists, and the listening circles, the emotional emancipation circles that he spoke about, really important. They're really powerful. Contact Malcolm, contact his organization, the organization OMA. So, and there'll be others that will be scrolled in this piece. Just make contact with them. And just keep supporting each other. And the last thing I want to say, and it's come across in the chat, is the importance of having culturally appropriate therapists. And actually some of that will start from you. There is no reason why there should be just 2% of 60,000, I think it's around that, probably a little bit more, but really low percent of counselors in the Association of the counseling and psychotherapy profession, my organization, being Black, such a minuscule amount. We can train therapists, speak to Malcolm, speak to Omar, contact me direct, British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapists, david.weaver@bacp.co.uk. Let's talk about how we can enter that profession. That's really needed. So I think it's the here and now piece, because of what's going on with the virus, as well as talking about how we do for self, because we've got to provide the services that we need and the Black men are needing. That's the context of this conversation. We'll have the Black sisters conversation next week. But Black men, the big, bad, dangerous ones, how the police see them and the system see them, We have to provide that support. We have to do for self, but we've also got to make sure that the organizations and the institutions are doing it as well. It's been a great conversation and an honor to be here.
Thank you, David. We've got a great comment. We said spirituality, the church. How important is that in maintaining mental health? Well, I'd like to say, absolutely it is, because all the research shows that if you've got a faith, whatever that faith is, that is the thing that will give you sustenance through difficulty. So, there's a whole host of another conversation about the role of faith, the church, and spirituality that time doesn't allow for this program, but we may come back and think about the role of the church. And I hope my brother
it's just worthwhile saying on that particular point that I think you and I and Viv and others have been meeting with the churches over the last week. The churches are making this a big issue, and they're not just talking about the role of the church, they're talking about themselves as Black church leaders, because they're under stress. They're doing more funerals than white ministers, and our communities are in grief and bereavement, and the churches play a key role in that. I speak as a son of a minister in relation to that as well, because they're suffering. Their mental health needs need to be addressed as well. So the Black churches, it's on their agenda. So I think, bring them onto this show and let the public have a conversation with them. So important.
David Weaver there, a preacher man, giving it you live from Nottingham. Viv, before we're going to come to you for concluding quotes, people. So make this your concluding quotes. Go ahead. You need to unmute yourself, my brother.
I'm not sure. I was expecting MediaNet to do that. That's why.
You keep saying that. Can you just be clear? Because
I can't. Well,
times. Just service yourself, my brother.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're fine.
I can hear you.
Well, I just want to repeat what Malcolm was saying. Not repeat, just endorse what Malcolm said and what David said. I think in the chat room there's some, and it's maybe for some people that came on afterwards, there's some confusion between organizations in our community are actually delivering the services and the networks that we're talking about that ensure the services are delivered. OMA falls into the latter category. It's not interested in repeating what's already there, but we know that there are lots of gaps, and it's the gaps that we want to address. And we also know that mainstream organizations like Mind and the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy have not been held to account in the past, and that's what we want to do going forwards. When it comes to the training and the capacity building, we want institutions like the Black Psychology Network, Institute for Black Psychology based in the States, to be driving on that, along with OMA and other organizations that have developed that experience over decades. It's the strategic elements of it that too often we drop the ball on, and as a result, our operational services doing the great work on the ground don't get the recognition, the ongoing support, and the resources. The last point I want to make, which is a practical one, is that there's lots of money available at the moment in the short term. There's 750 million in total. When it comes to the mental health bit, there's between 5 and 10 million available. We want to make sure that our Black organizations get as much of that money as possible, because as David's rightly said, they're in the front line. We're running some webinars over the next couple of weeks for people that want help and support putting in bids. And that will be run through one of my companies supported by Black Socks and Black Men for Change. So you can get the information. The email addresses should be put up. It's info@blacksocks.com. And I know MediaNet will circulate that information. Also, we have Omar putting out a newsletter from the middle of next month. If you want to contribute to the newsletter and get your organizations out there and profiled, if you want to be involved in the training and capacity building that Omar's negotiating and partnering on delivering over the next few months, again, send your information, your details through the email address, which is trust@oma-community.com. And we will definitely come back to you and make sure that this is truly a do for self exercise. Another great show, Lee, great contribution for the people on the panel and also the people in the group, the chat room, which is obviously going to inform a lot of the actions that we take going forward. So thank you for that. Oh, last point. We're doing one-to-one interviews through OMA next week. One of the individuals has been interviewed on a one-to-one basis by Great is Reverend Nims from Haringey. He's all over the place, but Haringey is where he's located. And unfortunately, he's presided over the funerals of too many of our young people. So it will be interesting to hear what he has to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Viv. Coming to you, Jay. Final comments, reflections, my brother.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is something that we haven't really spoken about is the actual people who support us. So I know through my thing, I lost a lot of friends, or felt that I lost a lot of friends because I think I just expected them to just reach out and do whatever. But there's a lot of undue pressure on our wives, partners, girlfriends, families, children. You know, they don't ask for to be put in this situation with us. So I want to mention them and like thank all those around for like supporting just in any way they can. And I think that's a topic as well that needs to be discussed in terms of those who are just put into this position of support without actually asking to be in that position of support.
Thank you for that, Jay. Acknowledgement for the sisterhood. I'll tell you something. I know I couldn't do anything that I'm doing without the support of wife and family, mothers, and my elder sisters. So I just want to endorse and back what you said. And of course, we will be talking to the sisters next Saturday, the 23rd of May, where we're going to have a sister mental health conversation. I'm sure they'll have more to say on those sorts of topics. Courtney, any final reflections and contributions?
No, I just wanted to say great discussion. Again, I'll say to everybody, discuss, because the discussions help break down the stigma. It helps raise awareness, and then obviously, you know, the lived experience. If like me and Jay and others talk lived experience, talk about it. Like it's that's the way we're going to get things out there. We just talk about it, and it's a healing process as well when you start talking about it. So you're disclosing it. Discover those organizations that are culturally competent to deal with the African Caribbean community, legit organizations, you know. So, you know, it's not about starting new things, but join those that are already there. So just go, and then, you know, for me, it is about what Viv's been talking about, drive the change. Let's have the voices at the table. You know, the Turkish community do it, the Jewish community do it, and please don't be ashamed of it. I've been in many discussions where they say, why is Father celebrating the African Caribbean community? And I told them straight, do you ask the Jewish that? Do you ask the Turkish that? I don't care what anybody else thinks. This is the community, African Caribbean community, Father's going to be serving. You know, I've got my boys, my grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren to come. So, you know, that's the legacy I'm looking at. So that's what I would say, my 4 Ds. Discussion, disclosure, discover, and drive change. That's from Christine Wellington, so I'm not owning it.
The 4 essential Ds in life for this type of conversation. Coming over to you, Malcolm. Great that you've been able to join us today. Just want to say a shout out to Jason Downer over in Jamaica, who's doing work in mental health. He's indicating from Jamaica, he's watching the program, he's getting a lot out of it. He's doing great work with churches and others on the mental health. And we wanted to say hi to everybody over there in the Caribbean. But coming to you, Malcolm, final thoughts and reflections. You need to unmute yourself, my brother. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, you're good now. You're good now.
I'm good. Okay. Yeah. In this time, we have to think about this not as a lockdown or we're in quarantine like we're prisoners. We have to take this back and take it as a pause. It's an opportunity for us to pause, to take time to breathe and review where we are in life and what we want for ourselves. It's a pause to take a break, to gather ourselves and renew energy for what we need to do for our community, to pause together and use the space to connect with each other. This has been wonderful this morning, connecting with brothers I haven't seen for a long time and new young brothers who I hope to catch up with again. And it's a pause where we should pause in solidarity with each other. We pause in solidarity with those that we've lost, but also in knowing that we should make a commitment that next time we face a challenge, we'll be stronger, we'll be in a better place.
Here, thank you for that, Malcolm. Well, that seems to be it for this. In terms of Marlon Morris, I think we will have to, by common consent and demand, Viv, do a one-to-one interview with Marlo, because there's a lot of comments who are lamenting the fact that he paused in his contribution, and there's a lot of people who want to hear that. So we'll make sure the efforts are made to capture that and get that out to the masses. Well, I'd say to goodbye to my distinguished panel. I mean, honestly, guys, absolutely fantastic, first class.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Lee. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute joy and honor and a pleasure to have you join us on the Jasper Drive Time. Thanks very much, and we'll see the panel again soon. Final concluding remarks from me. And, well, what can I say? I mean, Lee Jasper Drive Time is coming into its own as one of the channels where you can get good, clean information and hopefully mature contributions from our panelists on subjects that are very dear to the community's heart. I've thoroughly enjoyed the comments today. I would ask that you share the video because it will be online. It's a resource now there for everybody to watch. That you urge people to come and have a look at what we've put out here today. We do have on next Saturday, the 23rd of May, a discussion with our sisters. And boy, have we got some powerful sisters. Today's been good. I know I can see that in the comments. And tomorrow, next Saturday, will be equally as good. And let me just say this. The next exclusive for Lee Jasper Drive Time is an international discussion with representatives from the African Heritage Conversation, African Heritage Community in Brazil, the African American community in America, the African community on the continent with Professor Lumumba, Reverend Al Sharpton, Did you know that Brazil has the largest African diaspora of any community in the world outside the continent? And we just don't get them in the conversation. It's like our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. They're so far removed, we don't include them. Well, we're going to fix that on this show going forward. And I'm going to try my best to be as internationalist as we possibly can. So the Reverend Al Sharpton, Professor PLO Lumumba, if you've never heard him speak, you're going to be in for a real treat. Professors from Brazil, activists from over here in the United Kingdom. What are we talking about? The international impact of COVID virus on our communities. All over the world, Black people are being disproportionately affected. Economies are being adversely impacted. How are we going to cope as an international diaspora to support the continent to survive the COVID virus? Lee Jasper, that will be on Sunday, the 24th of May at 11 a.m. Watch out for the promotion material as it comes out. Thank you so much for the comments. Honestly, you've been equal to the panel. I have to say, we're not, everything that we've suggested, we're not talking about recreating the wheel. We're talking about bringing added value to the conversation. We're talking about bringing Black intellectualism to the conversation. We're talking about bringing common sense, love, compassion, empathy, and a wisdom of 10,000 years that is embedded in the principles of Ubuntu and our community, lovely knowledge. And can I say as also, I like the idea of a Black church conversation. I really like the idea of that, and we're going to explore that. So to all of you today, have a great day. It's been a pleasure presenting and moderating Lee Jasper Drive Time. We'll be back next week. The women on the Saturday and global international diaspora and COVID on the Sunday. Watch out for the promotion. My name's Lee Jasper. Big respect to Theo Ambrose back in the studio and MediaNet, our preferred media partner. And my sponsors, Black Socks and Section 109. This is Lee Jasper. Have a great weekend.
Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.